Hi, my name is Tara. I am a media intern at NOVAsia magazine, and welcome to the podcast. This week, we are discussing accessibility. Here in Seoul, buildings over 300 square meters are required to have accessibility ramps for people in wheelchairs, pregnant people, older adults. But a problem that we face here in Seoul is that there is not a lot of space, and so most buildings are not over 300 square meters, and that can really inhibit people with disabilities from getting around. So to discuss space as a limiting factor with accessibility and accessibility here in Seoul, I've brought two of my friends. Would you guys mind introducing yourselves?
Okay, hi, my name is Via and I come from Taiwan.
I'm David. I am Peruvian from Latin America.
And when did you guys both move to Seoul?
So it's this year, February.
But you lived here before, I think?
For one semester in 2019. Yeah.
So I came to Seoul last year in March, but I've been living in Korea since 2019 in Daejeon. Yeah.
And one of the first questions I wanted to ask is, what is one thing that you've noticed here in Seoul that they do to promote accessibility that they don't do in your home country?
So to me, it's the green and red light. You can press a button to let people know you're crossing the street. Yeah, we don't have. I don't think we have that in Taiwan. I think, yeah, that surprised me.
In my case, it's on the street. There's like this little yellow line. It's not a line, but it's like a pathway, let's say, that is kind of elevated. So I can assume someone who cannot see can actually follow that path and actually move along the road or even cross the street. So I think that's really, really good. In my country, we wouldn't have nothing like that.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's like a standard in many countries to have bright yellow be a walking path for visually impaired. And then usually right before you come to a crosswalk, there's a larger yellow section. Yeah, you're already thinking of it. And it'll have different textures. So people with really severe visual impairments like blindness, their cane can feel for the difference in texture and know to stop. One thing that I've noticed that is really interesting, I think that Korea has, is they have light up walks literally built into the curb. Like you mentioned, in Taiwan, they have the red and green across the street for when to walk. I think you meant across the street. And pressing the button.
Yes.
But also I think it's really interesting how they have like the curb light up as well. So if you can't see that far, the walking man can be really small.
Yeah.
So yeah, being able to have it like right under your toes. It's also helpful for me because I'm usually looking down at my phone. So then when it lights up, it's closer to me. But I think generally I notice more areas where Seoul might be lacking in terms of accessibility versus improved. So at least compared to the US. So is there any area where you see Seoul might be missing some chances for accessibility as compared to your home country?
So first about the red and green light. In Taiwan, we have sound. So like if you cannot see it, you can listen to it. No, now is the time for you to cross the street. And also about the yellow bikes. Actually, it was an issue in Taiwan because its height was different from other bikes. So maybe some people with wheelchairs can fall down because of the bikes. So we actually have a regulation about how high the bike should be. That can be a balance between these two groups. Yeah, that's a thing. And also there are so many slopes in Korea. It will be hard for wheelchair people to climb.
Yeah, the street itself is like not able, it's so mountainous here. It'd be hard for anyone to get up certain just streets.
Yeah.
Did you have something to add?
Well, to be honest, for me, being in Seoul is like being in the future. To be honest, I mean, here you have everything that my country doesn't have. No? But for example, something I've noticed that I think is very convenient is when in these bridges that walk across, let's say a highway, you have these elevators, no? to enable like visually, no, not visually, but who are physically impaired people to actually go up and then go down. I mean, for me that's fascinating. Even the braille, right? So the braille thing that what people can touch, no, and feel the button. No, for me that's amazing. No, it's really,
I'm really glad you're here because I was gonna criticize Seoul for not having enough elevators. I'm like, in the subway, you have to sometimes walk a really far way to find an elevator. And if you have like a limp, for example, and you're on one side of the train because you're, connecting or something, you have to walk so far. But you are right. Even for walking paths, always like those bridges over the street, they do have elevators. And they don't have that in the US either. So
really?
I mean, we have very few. We have very few walking bridges in general. Like the U.S. is not.
Really?
The U.S. expects everyone to drive. So if you're walking, it's like what. You're disabled and trying to get somewhere in your wheelchair. Like get in a car. Kind of. That's maybe a little strong language, but. Just in general, even if you're not disabled, like you'd be driving, even in a big city. Specifically, my best friend lives in Denver, and the roads are so wide that, like, everyone drives a car in the city. No one takes public transportation, and even thinking about it, they have one train in Denver, and I don't think it even has 2 stops. So, I think that might be partially why we don't have the street bridges as often. But yeah, I was going to be critical about that in Seoul. And something else I was thinking of being critical about is the lacking sound. Like my Korean friend says that it might be because like Korean people in general don't like a lot of extra noises when Seoul is already noisy, and that you can press a button, the same button you were mentioning earlier, it will make the noise, but yeah, for the most part, they don't do that. So I find that interesting, like the differences.
Yeah. I also want to add one point, like they have heavy gates, like super heavy doors without automatically doors. Because one time, I think it's in front of a department store, I saw a person with wheelchairs and he has a problem getting to the building. Some people pass by and open the door for this person. So I was like, why don't they have more automatically doors?
That's a good point, because I also know in Seoul, door holding is not like built into the culture the way it is where I'm from. Like everybody holds the door, even if maybe not in New York City, that's the most bustling we get, but at least where I'm from, you always hold the door. Even in Philadelphia, like that's the city I'm from, you would hold the door and nobody does that. I think it could be challenging if you need a door held for you and maybe you have a invisible illness. That kind of leads me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is, do you see space ever getting in the way of something that could be more accessible here in Seoul? So one example that I thought of personally is I'm not sure if you've ever been to the Daiso in Hongdae, but for those listening who have never been, it's 7 stories or so, and the elevator is so small that I don't think if you needed it, you'd be able to fit. At least I don't think you could fit a wheelchair maybe in it. And the aisles between are really small as well. So if you were in a wheelchair, I'm not sure you would fit. If you were in maybe even visually impaired, like I could see it being really challenging to navigate the store itself. So just that one stands out to me. But are there any other places where you see space as an issue?
Restaurants? Yeah, restaurants are super small. Yeah, I think it's because of the house prices, but I don't know, maybe it's part of their culture to sit very close to each other or on the ground, sit on the ground. So yeah, I don't know how a person with wheelchairs can fit in the restaurants.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point too, because even if it's not the ground, sometimes it's a stool. So if you have maybe, again, like an invisible disability where your back can't support you for very long, you can't lean at all here, which is annoying for me, and I'm very able-bodied in that way. So what did you have any thoughts?
Yes, for example, I've seen that in Daejeon, for example, the bicycle track used to be the same as the one for the pedestrian. No? So when I see the bicycle track on the streets here, like on one side of the avenue for the cars, it reminds me of my country because we also have that same track and it's extremely dangerous. Yeah, people in my country are very bad drivers and they just move into a bicycle track and they don't care if there's a guy there, they just boom and bump it. So I think Seoul could set a different example. No, I think Daejeon for me is an example. The bicycle track is the same for the pedestrian, and the guys who ride a bicycle are very responsible too. No? That, for example, I think could be changed.
Another one that I was thinking of when I was kind of originally thinking about this topic is a lot of times there's not room for a ramp outside of an establishment. There's in general not very many sidewalks. Like you mentioned, the bike and the pedestrian path being shared. But sometimes there's not even a bike or pedestrian path. The road that I live on personally has no sidewalk at all. So there's not room for a staircase. Or there might be room for a staircase, but there won't be room for like a ramp, which takes up a lot more square footage, which is kind of one of the reasons why I mentioned this topic, because just recently in the Korean Times, someone was talking about that 300 meter squared rule and how most buildings are not larger than 300 square meters. So people just can't get into the buildings. Even like a lip of more than 5 centimeters can stop an elderly person or trip them, or stop a wheelchair. So, yeah.
Actually, I want to add something. Like in 2019, I was in Seoul and I decided to have trips because I came here. So I grabbed 2 large luggages and found it's very inconvenient walking on the street because as you mentioned, there is no sidewalks and also there are no ramps beside the building. Like in Taiwan, we have regulations that if there's a stairs in front of the gate, you also have to have the ramps that the wheelchairs can go. But I think in Seoul there are not many ramps around the building. Yeah, it could be difficult for people to get into the building, and yeah, that's just what I want to add.
That kind of brings me to my next question. I wanted to ask, are there any ways that we could save space but still provide accessible entrance or walkways, etc., to people? I think we just criticized sharing the bike path and pedestrian path, but I guess in some streets that might be useful because there's really not much room, although I agreed 2 would be better. But any other thoughts on that matter? To get the ball rolling and the minds warming up, one thing I thought of is removing that lip. A lot of times that could be one thing, that threshold between the door and the street. I feel like a lot of times I see kind of one step and the sidewalk could be built around it to accommodate, or the floor could be sunken in a little bit. Any thoughts about stairs versus elevators, things like that?
In my case, not stairs, but perhaps about these. I mean, how do you call these? These
Scooters.
The scooters, no? Sometimes it seems to me that it's like litter that they're left wherever, and they yeah, it looks like some random scooter over there. I mean, who owns that? I think there should be some points as to where to leave the scooter, in my opinion, no? For example, in my country, 2 companies, I mean, one Spanish one and another from Brazil, they entered the market. In the end, they had to withdraw because in my country, streets are too narrow and no, the worst. But I think in Seoul, there should be more order as to where to leave these scooters, no? Not just anywhere, no? There's some place particular to put them, no?
Yeah, that could be hazardous if you're not expecting it. Especially not just where they're placed, but the speed of those scooters. If you're visually impaired, that thing will sneak up on you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like more order just in general, I think on streets could provide more safety for people walking around, especially if they're not able to, see a trip hazard or see something coming towards them.
Actually, there's one thing I'm not sure. I think about a bus because I never seen anyone in wheelchairs that take the bus. So in Taiwan, we have a special bus for people. Like it's lower, and we will have ramps for like disabled people can get into the bus. But I have never seen that in Seoul. I'm wondering how they move around. Like they cannot take taxi every time, I think.
Yeah, and taking a taxi has its own challenges.
Yeah.
I do know they do have some buses in Seoul that have a like hydraulic lift that lowers to the street and then back up, but I don't know if that's on every bus. But yeah, that's a great idea. Like if every bus had that built in, yes, it costs more money, but it would make it much more possible for people to move around the city freely. And I think we both mentioned the sound in Seoul for crossing the street. I feel like that's not in the way of space. That would be really easy to just add in instead of having to find the button. Because say you're visually and audibly impaired, you can't find the button to press for the noise. So, and do you find that space is always the issue? Like, are there things that are missing in Seoul that you think could be there that don't have anything to do with space?
So sometimes, for example, in Shincheon, around here, there's near the barbecue restaurant, there's one space that serves, like a scenario for performance. At the same time, there are like some pipes, like they go up, and I mean, I don't really understand what's the purpose of those pipes. If the thing is meant to be a scenario, then let it be a scenario, where people can. But putting this tubes over there, for me, it's like what's I mean, it's a bit. I don't understand what the real purpose of that thing is. No?
I know what you mean.
So maybe you could give up more space for not only like a performer, but to bring, his band, his drums, and I don't know, and use a space to actually, as a socket for electricity, to plug in. I don't know, but something like that.
There's a lot of public art in Seoul.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of public meeting places. It seems like they do dedicate a lot of space towards the people here. It's just like maybe, like you're saying, they could kind of shift about how they're using that space for the people. That makes sense. Any other thoughts, Via?
To me, if they have more elevators, everything will get better. Like, super better, especially in the subway. Like, I really have a time struggling to find elevators, especially with two large luggages. And it turns out we just carry one for one time, keep climbing. So if they can make finding an elevator more easily, it would be better.
Yeah, actually, one of the reasons I thought about this topic was, one, because I think about bringing my sister. She's really well now, but if something were to happen, then how would I get her around? And also, I sprained my ankle recently, and I'm like hobbling to get to work or wherever. And yeah, finding the elevator can be even more challenging than just going up the steps. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. And like the elevator doesn't necessarily take more space than the stairs. You do need to have stairs for fire regulations, but also I think that sometimes, space is an issue here, but Korea is extremely innovative. They are able to fit a lot in small spaces, so I think with a little more prioritization, they could fit more into smaller areas. Like, I don't know if you guys have noticed, at the crosswalks also, there's sometimes little chairs for the elderly to sit in that fold out.
Yes.
Yeah, every now and then I see someone using one, and that's like such a small, easy thing. Instead of like having to build a full bench, just this little fold out chair built into the like infrastructure. It's super smart. So yeah, I think that Seoul could do a better job if they put more thought energy maybe towards it, because they're really able to find, I don't know if you've noticed any small things that make your life easier here that are just kind of almost absurd. Like,
To me, like my country is like backwards. So for me, when I went to the bus stop and I see this panel with, I mean, the time in which each bus will arrive, like 10 minutes. For me, that's wow. I mean, for you guys, it may sound like oh boring, no, like dumb. But for me, it's like, I mean, here you have this. Here, I mean, you guys are considerate with the passenger. In my country, it's the bus just arrives and it stops over there, and I mean, people just flock in and okay, you're out, and they, So well, it's amazing. For me, that's, I mean, when I first saw it, I took a picture. I sent it to my mom, like, Mom, look at this thing. It's crazy. We need this, but to do that, you need like political willingness, no? I mean, without, I mean, just it's someone with a vision can do it.
I went to a restaurant with an umbrella dryer, and it was like a little mini car wash almost. You drag your umbrella through it, and it whisks all the water away. And yeah, I think you're right. Like, if they can make something for that small of an inconvenience, like, oh, my umbrella's wet and I don't want to leave it by the front door, then yeah, with a little more political activism, then it could get a lot better. Do you think that all buildings should have to have the regulation to have, accessible entry and accessible aisles, accessible stairs, like ramp combinations? Or do you think, that's quite the expense, and space really truly is an expense here? Like, it's not lightly like, oh, you don't have space. Like, really, they don't have space for certain things. So do you think that you need to be able to provide those options regardless of how big the building is, or do you think it's okay in some instances, buildings under 300 meters squared, to loosen up and not have so many regulations for accessibility?
For me, of course, they need to do that, because it's not only for like wheelchairs, it's also for strollers. Like, if you have babies, you also have to do that. And also, I think people pay taxes, so we deserve to have a better environment to have everything get well. And also, we will get old. We cannot promise like, okay, maybe I can walk now, maybe tomorrow something happened, I cannot walk, so I will need that. So to me, government should prepare that.
Yes, I agree with her, but also on those buildings which are, as you mentioned, below the 300 meters squared, usually the companies that occupy these spaces may be small, and perhaps they don't have the budget to build like a ramp, though it's necessary. So what I would argue here is perhaps from a local government initiative to try to give some tax exemption to these companies that actually make the effort to invest in that. So you compensate. So, but in the end, I do agree that they need, because you may have customers who are, as you mentioned, who maybe have a stroller, or go in a wheelchair, or maybe are blind, but in the end they want to pay for what you sell. No? So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I would have thought of like government subsidy, but a tax exemption is like a great solution to that problem. Wow, thank you for sharing, and thank you as well, Via. Both of those thoughts I think are really helpful, like especially I know that there's a lot of calls for change in Seoul about some of these things. So I appreciate your thoughts and feedback. And thank you to the audience for listening. If you happen to be on YouTube, maybe like and subscribe. And this was NOVAsia Magazine. And I'm Sara. And this is David. And this is Via. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.